Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. So, I feel like I haven't filmed in a while. I've been very busy and haven't had the chance to sit down, but we are very close to probably the most exciting part of the year on Booktube for me, and that is Nonfiction November. I have not made any recommendations videos as I tend to do, so I will probably be doing that as November comes around and do some themed recommendations. I have some plans on things that I want to film in November, so that will be coming. But today I thought that I would just sit down and share my Nonfiction November TBR. A lot of people use the word possibilities, and that is always how I interpret my TBR. I have tried not to include books that I've already talked about recently. So for example, in the previous video I talked about my plans to read Iranian women, and one of the books that I am still currently reading is Reading Lolita in Tehran, and that is a nonfiction book. So I am reading this book this month, but I have already talked about it, so my pile is ridiculous, and I am not in any way anticipating reading all of these books, but I don't quite know what I'm in the mood for, and also I'm trying to mix some hardcovers with paperbacks because realistically I will be more inclined to pick up the paperbacks. So anyway, that is all of the introductions needed. Let's get into the actual books. So first we have, I don't know if I have any order to these books. I don't really, so I'm just going to jump in. First we have Flâneuse by Lauren Elkin. Women walk the city in Paris, New York, Tokyo, Venice, and London. I talked about this earlier this year when I bought it because I had borrowed it from the library, and I read the first 30 pages and was basically annotating or wanting to annotate every single page, and so I figured I needed my own copy, and then I had planned to bring it on my summer vacation traveling, but the traveling aspect of the summer was just so stressful because of all of the cancellations of flights that I wasn't in the mood to read anything related to traveling. I was just hoping that my travel plans wouldn't be cancelled last minute, and thankfully it sort of worked out, but it wasn't exactly what I had planned. So because of that, I didn't want to read anything related to this topic for a while. But I will be going on a short work trip during November, and I thought this might be a good train read and to have as a company through my various walks there. So there's that one, and this is, I haven't even talked about what this one is about, but it is basically about exploring cities through walking and gaining that geography through a physical movement, which is something I find fascinating. So I really loved what I read of this and looking forward to getting back to it. Next we have a book that I actually bought around this time last year, hoping that I could get to it in November, and I think it arrived too late for me to actually be able to read it in Nonfiction November. It is solely based on Roxy's recommendation, and that is A Natural History of the Piano, the Instrument, the Music, the Musician from Mozart to Modern Jazz, and Everything in Between by Stuart Isakov. I had my eye on this one for a long time, but Roxy talked about it I think last year and raved about it, and I really trust Roxy's recommendations. So and I always read, I love reading about music, as you might know. I will link a music nonfiction recommendations video that I did I think last year. So if you're interested in this topic, I'll leave a link to that so you will find more books in this vein. But I really love reading about this topic in nonfiction. Music nonfiction is one of my favorite subgenres in nonfiction, and so I think I've read something music related for the last few Nonfiction Novembers, and this will be this year's, hopefully. It's kind of a heavy book, so I will have to be reading this in bed, but I love the sound of this. It's basically about the piano, and reading about classical instruments, particularly the piano and the violin, is my favorite topics. And yeah, so I don't really know anything more than that. It is a book about the instrument and history related to it, and I love also the fact that piano can be used in so many different types of music, but it sort of concentrates my two favorite genres of music, or two of my favorite genres of music, which is soundtracks and sort of classical music vibes and jazz. So there's that one. A book I've had, I think I bought this one early on in the first year of the pandemic, because it seemed like the type of book that I would want to read at that time. And I've been really drawn to it for a long time, so possibly it will happen this month. It is Behind the Scream by Sue Prideaux, and this is obviously a book about Edvard Munch. And it's sort of described to me, the way I interpret this book is both that it's a biography, of course, but also that it sort of chronicles his mental state and his kind of a deteriorating mind, so, or sort of an increasing sense of dread. So it says, who was the man behind the scream, the iconic painting so acutely express the anguish of the 20th century? Edvard Munch was 28 when he embarked on a lifelong effort to paint his soul's diary and began a perverse love with self-destruction. This intimate and moving life of the Norwegian artist explores his turbulent early years, his time as a recluse, and his intense efforts to paint not what he saw, but what he experienced. I love also reading about art history, and this combination with mental illness and mental health is, again, something that really appeals to me. And as I said, I have sort of been drawn to this book for a few weeks, and so I wanted to add it to my list, despite the fact that it's a very thick biography that I'm not sure I will actually be drawn to read realistically. Then we have a few memoirs. So we have Michelle the Giant, An African in Greenland by Tete Michelle Kopmasi. And this one I mentioned in my Springathon TBR, I think, this year. And I bought it for that purpose and never got around to it. But I have been really eager to read this one for a while. It's basically travel writing. From the moment the young Tete Michelle read about Greenland in a bookshop in the 1950s Togo, he became obsessed with traveling to this distant glacial wilderness of snow and midnight sun. Michelle the Giant is his captivating account of his years-long journey over land and sea from West Africa to the Arctic Circle. Also, I feel like I'm more and more pulled to books with a wintry theme now that winter is approaching. Especially after Halloween, I am very much in the Christmas mind frame, and this seems like the kind of book that would be perfect for dark, cold November days. So there's that. And then I have a book that is the second in trilogy, and that is Youth by Tove Ditlevsen. This is the Danish original, the Copenhagen trilogy. Copenhagen trilogy. I read Childhood, which is the first part in the trilogy, 2 years ago or last year, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't absolutely love it, but I was still curious enough to want to read on with the trilogy, and I read it in Swedish, in a Swedish translation, but I thought that I would push myself to try to read this in the Danish original. This trilogy is about Tove Ditlevsen's growing up in during the 20th century, and she became a writer, and so the latter books, I think, is about her writing career. This one, I remember, starts off with her first job, and so I guess it's sort of adolescent to young adult life, and sort of becoming an individual and figuring out what you want to do, and starting off her career, I'm assuming. So there's this one. Next we have a Swedish memoir, and that is A Drop of Midnight, I think is the English title. En droppe midnatt is the original, and it's by Jason Timbuktu Dakite, and this is a famous Swedish rapper and musician, and I've been interested in this one for a while, and I know that it has a English translation that came out again a year or so ago, and the thing that really pulls me to this is that I've been wanting to read more from biracial voices in Sweden or from immigrant voices, basically just seeing other versions of experiencing life in Sweden from a racial perspective and from ethnicity. It is an important type of story that I've definitely overlooked how important it is to me, and how much comfort I gain from seeing this mirror of aspects of my own life and of the people around me as well. So in the same vein, I came across this book and have been really interested in reading it ever since. Next we have a book that is on family and memory, and that is In the Dark Room by Brian Dillon. I love his Growlo editions. I was recommended this book by Jasmine Alexa. I will put her Instagram link below, and I think she recommended this based on the fact that I have been talking a lot about loving to read about memory in nonfiction. People in some way reflecting on memory, especially connected to physical objects. And this book is, I think, about Brian Dillon's childhood home and sort of separating from this home, I think, if I remember correctly. Explores the question of how memory works emotionally and culturally. It is narrated through the prism of the author's experience of losing both his parents, his mother when he was 16, his father when he was on the cusp of adulthood, and of trying after a breakdown some years later to piece things together. But I feel like this is the type of book that I would love, and especially in this current, my current frame of mind, it seems like the kind of book that I would annotate a lot, and that is what I've been really craving. I've been reading Rings of Saturn by Sebald with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and it has been a really fun, engaging reading experience for me, precisely because it makes me annotate and think and reflect, and that is my favorite kind of reading experience, and I have a sneaking suspicion that this will be a similar experience, so this will probably be high on my priority for November. Next we have a swimming memoir, and again, this is one of my favorite subgenres of nonfiction. We have Swimming with Seals by Victoria Whitworth, and yeah, it's a swimming memoir. And through this topic, it is also talking about mental health, I think. This is a memoir of intense physical and personal experience exploring how swimming with seals, gulls, and orcas in the cold waters of Orkney provided Victoria Whitworth with an escape from a series of life crises and helped her to deal with intolerable loss. So I feel like this is right up my alley. I am... as I said, I love this topic. I love reading about swimming and what swimming means to people, because it is so often such a freeing experience, and dealing both with physical issues, like being part of rehabilitation for the body, but also for the mind. And I just love that about this topic and what it brings out of writers. So again, I'm sure I'm gonna love this. Next we have a library book, and the reason I wanted to include it is because I am already currently reading it, and I will for sure be reading it in November, and that is Statsministermordet by Hans-Gunnar Axberger. This is a recent publication, so it is not available in English yet. But the reason I am currently reading this is that it was nominated for the August Prize. That is a literary prize. It's the biggest literary prize in Sweden, aside from the Nobel Prize. And it's named after August Strindberg. And I always mean to read from the nomination list, and usually I don't really get around to them around the time that the nomination is, or the prize is still running. But I actually borrowed several of them from the library already and have others on reservation on hold. So we'll see how it goes. But this is one I have already started, and it is about the Olof Palme murder. I think this will be a really interesting historical nonfiction that is sort of building up both the event itself, the murder, and also the investigation around it, which was kind of a disaster, a failure, and has been hanging on as a failure for decades. And this book is kind of focusing on what went wrong and what people knew and why the investigation went the way it went. So it's kind of a journalistic point of view, but the author is one of the people who has been part of the most recent investigation into the Olof Palme murder. So this is one of the Swedish books I am going to be reading in November. I mentioned earlier the Reading Iranian Women video that I made previously, and one book that I wanted to read in connection with that is The Shah by Abbas Milani. This is a historical book that really, I think, puts the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Revolution or the Iranian Revolution into context, because it's about the Shah and about the leading up to the revolution and the way that the country changed before and after. And so it is both a biography and a history, and I think there's a lot of information in this book, I think, that will fill in the gaps for me, and I have sort of a cursory understanding of Iran's history of the 20th century, but I think this will be filling in a lot of the important gaps for me in my knowledge, and so I've been wanting to read it for a while. I got this from my dad as a Christmas gift, I think last year or the year before, and so I really want to read this one soonish, and it is definitely one of my priorities. So if I don't finish it in November, I will at least start it. Lastly, I have 4 hardbacks that I don't know if I will actually be able to read, because I don't really like to carry around hardcovers when I'm on the bus and things like that. So we'll see if I actually end up reading these books. But I wanted to show them off because they are very new purchases and I'm very excited about them. So this is basically a little bit of a mini haul. So we have The Draw of the Sea by Will Memoirs, and this is a gorgeous cover. So to me, this is probably one of the most beautiful covers I bought this year, and it is about the end papers as well. This is about the pull to the sea, the draw of the sea, why people are so drawn to it, and I think this is a title made for me. The ocean fires our imagination, provides joy, solace, and play, but also wields immense destructive power. The Draw of the Sea explores communities whose lives revolve around the coast of Cornwall and the Isles of Sicily, and the specifics of these livelihoods and their rich histories and traditions. Will Memoirs captures the universal human connection to the sea. This feels like the type of book that I would read in December. I think I've mentioned in previous videos that I often leave the fun nonfiction for myself, or the fun books, for December. Books basically that I am expecting that I will have a lot of fun with, and usually they are very niche, specifically my interests. So last year, for example, I read Truffle Hound. The next one I have is Belonging, Natural Histories of Place, Identity and Home by Amanda Thompson, and this is again a nature-related book. It says, reflecting on family, identity, and nature, Belonging is a personal memoir about what it is to have and make a home. It is a love letter to nature, especially the northern landscapes of Scotland and the Scots pine woods of Abernethy, home to standing dead trees known as snags, which support the overall health of the forest. Belonging is a book about how we are held in thralls of two elements of our past. It speaks to the importance of attention and reflection and will encourage us all to look and observe and ask questions of ourselves. So I heard about this book through Jessica J. Lee. I follow her on Instagram, enjoyed both of her books a lot, so I've been really enjoying seeing the books that she is mentioning on her Instagram, and this was one of them. And it sounds fantastic and connecting both the nature theme, which is of course something I love, but also the belonging and identity and family and memory and all of those various threads of interest to me. Next we have a book that I was actually recommended by someone in the comments. I think in my autumn TBR that I did, where I talked about 2 books related to knitting, but this one is related to sewing / fashion in general, and that is Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sophie Tenhauser, and this is a chronicle of fashion history, I would say. I'm expecting. From the women who transformed stalks of flax into linen to clothe their families in the 19th century New England, to those who earned their dowries in the cotton spinning factories of South India today, this book traces the origins of garment making through time and around the world, exploring the social, economic, and environmental impact of our most personal possessions as well as the extraordinary human stories behind them. Worn looks beyond care labels to show how clothes reveal the truth about what we really care about. I love fashion history because it's such an interesting and sort of intimate way to learn about how people have lived through different centuries and through different places as well. And I really love reading about as I mentioned, in regard to memory related to physical objects, that is kind of the same vein with reading about fashion history and reading about the materials themselves, and this one is specifically about that. Last of my TBR is another recent publication. Like all of the book haul section of this, I think all of them were recent releases. This one is called Violent Phenomena, and it is 21 essays on translations. I heard about this one through Anton Her's Instagram, and I think he has one of the essays in this collection is written by him. Anton Her is the translator of Love in the Big City and Cursed Bunny, 2 of the books that he translated from the Korean that were nominated for the Booker International this year and that I read and really enjoyed. So I'm partly interested in this book because of his essay specifically, because I've really enjoyed his the books that he has translated, but also this is completely my wheelhouse, talking about linguistics and translation and reading and all of those things, and it seems like it's such an interesting combination of authors and translators that are included in this anthology. Let's see, 24 writers and translators from across the world share their ideas and practices for disrupting and decolonizing translation. And it's such an interesting list. I'm looking forward both to reading this and engaging with what they have to say about translation, but also to explore and to become familiar with new names that I can then move on to learn more about their works further later on. So really interested in this one, and this was also published by Tilted Axis, which is definitely becoming one of my favorite publishers. Those are the books that I wanted to show you and share with you for my Nonfiction November TBR this year. We'll see what I end up reading. I have a feeling that the paperbacks will be the ones that I am most likely to read, but as I said, I have several hardbacks that I am so drawn to that we'll see how I sort of manage to balance those two things. But that was all I wanted to say today. I would love to know if you have read any of these books, and please, if you have any recommendations of nonfiction that fit in with these types of books, or in general, if you know my taste well, please feel free to share recommendations to me. I always take note of them. And also, I would love to see your plans for Nonfiction November. If you have made a TBR, let me know in the comments. That was all I wanted to say. I hope you're doing well and taking care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!